Great. Well, it's lovely to be with you all this afternoon. It's at least the weather seems to have brightened up here in Sutton Coldfield, so welcome to my attic. I've been working out of here since the beginning of lockdown, and I am looking forward to getting back to the Jewellery Quarter at some point. But it's been an interesting time. It's been quite a tragic time, of course, but it's been an interesting time as the impact of the pandemic has just run through every strand of our lives, and how that is going to continue to impact us, well, we can only wait and see. But I've always been interested in how our environment can affect our health, and how that is more relevant today than it's ever been. And as we emerge from this pandemic, we've all been re-evaluating what is most important to us. And now there's a very bright spotlight on parks and green space, and how this is now in the population psyche, where it's being talked about, it's been written about, and people have found a new love for their local parks and their back gardens. But just before we start, what I'd like to do is I'd like you all to consider what your happy place is. And by that, what I mean is, where do you think of when you're mentally imagining a place of tranquility, somewhere restorative, away from the stresses of life? So just take a moment to think of where you mentally go to. And when I ask this question to a live audience, I know you're all alive, but I can't see you, I'd ask what that place would be. And what it amazes me, without fail, over 90% of the audience usually says it's somewhere natural. It's a woodland, it might be open countryside, it could be the coast, but it's usually somewhere natural. And what this demonstrates is that we automatically revert to contact with nature as it's an innate human need. And this affinity with nature is associated with our evolutionary dependence on nature to provide those essential resources for our survival. And there's now a wealth of research that demonstrates that a positive impact of nature on people's physical health, and how they feel and how they behave. And it provides us with the evidence that we need to justify investment into our green spaces. So throughout history, disease has shaped our cities as epidemics lead to significant change in planning and the development of infrastructure. This picture on your screen at the moment is the first purpose-built public park in the world, and it's in the town where I was born. So Alison, you'll know this, it's in Birkenhead. And as the town rapidly expanded in the 1840s, the business leaders wanted to avoid the public health issues experienced by Liverpool. So they decided to build a park at the centre of the town for everybody to enjoy and to improve the health of the local population. But did you know that Birkenhead Park was the inspiration for New York's Central Park? So around the same time, the city leaders in New York decided that they were going to start with a green heart for the expansion of Manhattan. And this was at a time when New York was being blighted by cholera epidemics. And so they organized a design competition for their new park. And a chap called Frederick Law Olmsted, who entered the competition, traveled to Birkenhead and Liverpool to have a look at the parks there. And he was inspired by Birkenhead Park, designed by Joseph Paxton, and subsequently won the competition for Central Park. And of course, Central Park is a beautiful green oasis right in the middle of the city. And 160 years later, it's as relevant today as it was then. It is a fantastic legacy, and it's iconic for New York. Just look at it. You instinctively know that this is good for you. Similarly, the cholera epidemics of the mid-19th century, caused by the squalid and insanitary living conditions, resulted in thousands of deaths in London and other major industrial cities in Britain. And at the time of the Great Stink in London caused by the River Thames being effectively an open sewer, it was thought that cholera was transmitted by odour until the connection was made that raw sewage was contaminating the drinking water, which was all coming out of the River Thames. And so began the building of a new sewer system. And of course, this is a photograph of the Victoria Embankment, which has become one of London's most iconic examples of the great Victorian public realm, another great legacy for the city. And in fact, at the same time, Paris was refashioned with tree-lined boulevards, squares and city parks, all for the very same reason. So we know that green spaces and contact with nature is important for our health and well-being, and yet our towns and cities are devoid of trees. And sadly, 80% of public realm in the UK are highways, and the green space is often the areas that are left over. And with all that going on, it's very easy to forget we're facing another emergency, the climate and biodiversity crisis. In the first few months of the pandemic, we saw some of the benefits of lockdown. We had cleaner air, clear streets, and a very clear direction where people don't want to go back to the old ways. The way in which we recover from this pandemic can pull us towards a greener and better future. And I would suggest this is the time for us to, as design professionals, to act on the evidence, to reevaluate how we design and retrofit our towns and cities to become more resilient to the effects of climate change and to promote a healthy people. So what is evidence-based design and how can we use it to shape our environment? Well, EBD is the process of constructing a building or a physical environment based on scientific research to achieve the best possible outcome. And it has its origins in medical practice, where research has shown that the design of the healthcare environment can affect patient recovery. So to improve public health, it is important that we use the evidence to support the provision of our parks in towns and cities. And we use EBD in my practice. We've completed many projects in healthcare where the design for each project is underpinned with research and evidence to support those healthy outcomes. So going back in time, there's always been a significant link between gardens and healing. During medieval times, local people would look to religious communities with care provided by monks and nuns, and the monastic garden was the source of most remedies where the herbs and other things were grown. But it wasn't until the end of the 18th century that the lunatic asylum emerged as the first purpose-built healthcare facility in the UK, and the commissioners who ran the asylums recognised that the mental and physical health of the patients was positively affected by the access to the parkland around the asylums. And not surprisingly, they actually found that the patients were less aggressive, and it became standard then in asylums design at that time to always have beautiful parks and gardens for relaxation and recreation. The root of evidence-based design dates back to around 1860, when medicine was becoming more scientific and when Florence Nightingale pioneered the modern profession in nursing. She was a great exponent of evidence-based design, and she identified fresh air as the very first canon of nursing, and considered the environment to be an element affecting patient recovery. What is not commonly known about her is that she pioneered a model for the design of the Pavilion Hospital building with wards that are surrounded by gardens and courtyards. And these were the very first modern hospitals as we would recognise them. And they were designed to provide fresh air, to give patient access to exercise. They were used as kitchen gardens and a place where medicinal plants could be grown. And so gardens and access to fresh air remained an important therapeutic tool right into the 20th century, with the open air institutions mainly used to treat lung disease like TB. But since the NHS was formed in 1947, there's been a decline in hospital gardens, with the increasing pressures on the hospital grounds to provide space for car parking and new diagnostic tools. And it wasn't until in the 1980s that the benefit of the hospital garden was re-evaluated. And the therapeutic value of natural light, fresh air, and natural landscapes finally emerged as a new way of thinking, leading to the research of Professor Roger Ulrich, who is very well known in medical circles. He's both a medical researcher and a landscape architect, as it happens. He explored the restorative qualities of a natural setting in a hospital and the positive impact it had not only on the patients but also on the staff and visitors too. And he found that patients with a view of nature had shorter post-operative stays. They took fewer analgesics than those who faced a brick wall, and heart rate, pain and blood pressure was all reduced. If you have a patient who can leave hospital half a day or a day early, that can save thousands of pounds, and you reproduce that right across the NHS and you can see what sort of saving that could make. This theory of Ulrich is now endorsed by the BMA and has been significantly influencing healthcare design for the last 20 or 30 years. Based on this evidence, we as a practice continue to advance develop the concept of the healing landscape, and we collaborate with other constructional professionals to deliver projects like this new hospital in Dumfries and Galloway, where the patients have the full view of the landscape. The facilities for the staff are as good as they are for the patients, and it is a pleasant experience for the visitors too. With visual connections between the indoor and outdoor space is so important on many levels, and there's no room that doesn't have a window into a garden or into the greater landscape beyond. So working closely with the clinicians, we've designed gardens to support treatment, for rehabilitation, mental health, and also to provide respite. But hospitals don't make a population healthy. They only treat the symptoms of disease. And we can use this evidence-based design principles. They are completely transferable, and we use them to inform how we design healthy environments. We know that we are facing a ticking time bomb in public health. It will be exacerbated by climate and biodiversity emergency, and it was a perfect storm even before COVID. Research shows that poor access to green space causes a lack of physical activity and results in life-limiting diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. The 2019 World Health Organization report highlights a global epidemic of childhood inactivity, and it's just appalling that 11 to 17-year-olds, 75% of boys and 85% of girls are inactive. That is just building up a problem for healthcare in future years. And poor access to green space also affects our mental health, causing stress and anxiety. On top of all of that, the physical effects of pollution, the urban heat island effect coming out of climate change also causes disease and can even cause mental disorders. As I say, that's even before COVID. So we have a problem, and already we have 80% of the population live in towns and cities, and there'll be even more pressure on our urban areas as the world population is predicted to expand to 10 million by 2050. And many people don't realize that we're all part of an ecosystem, and there's a lack of empathy with nature. Children are so disconnected from their outdoor environments. We've got to find a way of making that connection and getting them outside. And what COVID has done, I think, is highlighted just how the disadvantaged have been badly impacted. And that will happen also. The most disadvantaged will also be the most impacted by the effects of global warming. And just last week, I read that 1 in 8 British households has no garden, and Black people in England are nearly 4 times as likely as white people to have no outdoor space at home. So we must do better. Future developments must be designed with landscape at their heart, and cities must be retrofitted with space for people and for nature. This diagram demonstrates the tree canopy inequality and the effects of the urban heat island on the Birmingham city and the neighbouring wards. And what you can see is how green and how much cooler it is in the northern part of the city around Sutton Park, which is that 2,000-acre green lung in Sutton Coalfield, compared to the hotter, lower, very low areas of green space or urban tree canopy towards the city centre. And you see those tower blocks around Nechells and Ladywood, who are looking out onto a very grey city centre. We know we have enormous healthcare issues, but we also have a solution. It's a fact that if people live longer if they live close to green space. 300 metres seems to be the ideal distance, the research shows. So many studies and research now demonstrate that the importance of access to landscape is more relevant than ever in the context of a modern urban lifestyle. And it shows that green space improves the environmental conditions, which in turn improves activity. Contact with nature has a surprisingly fast effect and will improve mental health and social cohesion really quickly. And in fact, you can even see the difference within 7 days of being in contact with nature. And what is absolutely astonishing, in my view, is that children growing up surrounded by green open spaces have 55% less risk of mental health later in life. So this growing evidence base confirms that spending on healthcare could be reduced if greater investment was made in preventing ill health in the first place before it has a chance to occur. And to be honest, it's what people want. The impact of coronavirus has showed and changed many people's priorities, and they've come to appreciate how important their gardens and parks are to them. And the findings of surveys taken over the last few months confirm this. As you can see, that 71% of people want the UK's green spaces to be enhanced with more plants and wildlife. So I think it demonstrates that our priorities are gradually changing. So the good news is that there are some amazing examples of city greening around the world, and we have to make space for nature. This is an urban forestry scheme in Melbourne. It's citywide tracts of forest connected with green walking and cycling corridors, which makes a fantastic facility for the city. The La Rambla was originally an open sewer, La Rambla being in Barcelona, and now it's a green river of vegetation running through the city, providing a coolness and shading for the hot summer weather. Developing high-value real estate doesn't necessarily deliver a healthy city, and in Chicago, they found space for the green. Instead of building on the old railway sidings right in the center of Chicago, they built Millennium Park, and it's become a fantastic destination, not only for the residents, but for tourists also. And the spaces don't have to be large interventions. Pocket parks offer a green oasis and an escape from the hustle and bustle of the city. This is a world famous project, Paley Park in New York, where water is a really important feature because it drowns out the sounds of the city. But joining up these spaces, they might be small, but if you join them up, they become much more effective for both humans and wildlife. And bringing nature closer to people right on your doorstep or on your balcony. This is a fantastic project at the Bosco Verticale in Milan. The vegetation on this building is worth 3 hectares of forest. It has a cooling effect, it absorbs carbon dioxide and emits loads of oxygen, which is just fantastic. And if there's no space at ground level, well, perhaps we should be looking at the rooftops to provide interconnected sky parks. This is the new Sky Park for the Google headquarters in London. And of course, Birmingham's got its own famous roof garden, which I really like. But we need more of this. This is the only one in the city. And traveling through green routes is really important too, to encourage walking and cycling, and then to connect those green spaces in our cities. And could this be the way forward for Birmingham? My practice undertook a green visioning exercise for our city a couple of 3 years ago, and we came up with the idea for greening our main arterial routes across the city centre along the A38 and the railway, and they would bisect the city. Landscapes to travel through and green corridors are a great way of introducing green into the city. Once you do, if you have a look at this image here, it's a very poor Google bird's eye view of the city centre, but that is the A38 on Great Charles Street and some empty potential building development sites. But we looked at how we could green it, and having those interconnected spaces, why can't we give up a little bit of our development land to bring some green into the city centre? So here's our challenge. Are we at that tipping point or even pushing at an open door? Because epidemics and pandemics have their own temporality. Panic dissipates very quickly and people very rarely follow up. The current crisis could be a once in a lifetime, generation even, opportunity to take a step back, reassess our fundamental assumptions about how our cities and towns are structured. This is the best time ever to think of a green and walkable city. So thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Jay. And that was a really inspirational presentation. And hopefully, given our current situation, being in lockdown and the inability to enjoy our urban spaces as much as we would have been, people might stop taking them for granted. And we might look to include them a lot more in our design process as well. We've got some questions. We've got a couple off the audience and we've got some other questions for you as well. So we'll kick off with our first question, and that is, could you describe your management strategy to motivate staff, manage expectations and stay connected with your officers?
Well, we didn't have an awful lot of preparation time before we went into lockdown, did we? It was all a bit of a mad panic, but we'd fortunately had invested in some new IT just by chance, really. And we got all of that sorted, tested it a week or two before lockdown actually became a reality. And fortunately, we've been able to stay pretty well connected. Our whole office is intact. We're all working from home. And in the last couple of 3 weeks, we've had a number of people going into the office, but they're generally people who are not traveling any distance, where nobody's using public transport, they're walking to work. And it's been quite a difficult thing to manage. I know that all the directors have really had to work hard to keep the sort of cohesive group together. And we have afternoon tea. Every afternoon we have put the kettle on and we all get together for a cuppa just to keep everybody in touch, because some people are living on their own and they were really quite isolated, particularly in the earliest stages of lockdown. So I think having that contact was really important, and just time not to talk about work, but just to have a chat. And if you didn't feel like joining, and you don't have to, so some days you might get loads of people and other days, you know, you might just get 2 or 3 joining in. So staying connected was really important. And we've also managed to continue with appraisals and making sure that staff are supported. Whether it's an IT issue or whether it's a mental health issue or a logistical issue, we've been trying to do that. And I can't say it's been easy and it hasn't been perfect, but we've been doing our utmost to try and keep the team together and keep them going and motivated.
Yeah, I think that's all you can do. I think you just try and do your best. That's all I can ask of you. So we do have some other questions. One of our questions is, can we make the Green Corridor initiative a reality?
Well, it's funny because we had a look at this some time ago, and then the transport plan for Birmingham that Birmingham City had come up with was to actually downgrade the A38 and to create more of a sort of cycle route to stop the traffic from going through the middle of the city and to divert it. So the A38 could be downgraded into just a bus route and cycle lanes and so on. We thought, well, actually, that was our idea. Let's just hang a whole load of trees on it, not as crudely as that. Let's get that ribbon effect going through. Now, if they really are looking at doing that to the A38, yes, I think there is every chance that it could be a reality, but I think we as residents and interested professionals in the city should put pressure on the city council to deliver something decent, something that's worthwhile. Otherwise, we don't want a great big dual carriageway with just some traffic cones demarking where you can go and cycle. And that becomes a temporary situation, becomes a permanent situation. I think that would be tragic.
Most definitely. Is there any further research done on the heatwave to green space ratio in Birmingham?
Yeah, I think the City Council have done quite a lot of work on that, and they teamed up with Lancaster University. So there's quite a bit of stuff you can Google from that. Birmingham is a particularly hot city. Birmingham also calls itself a biophilic city and brag about how many trees they have. But all the trees are actually around the suburbs, so it's very well provided for. So Edgbaston's very green, Sutton Coldfield's very green, but then you get into the city centre. The only really distinctive green open spaces in the city are ecclesiastical, so they belong to St Philip's and St Paul's, and then the graveyards in the Jewellery Quarter. So if you're actually doing the city living thing, there's nowhere to go other than the canals, and apparently they were horrendous during lockdown. So the biophilic city is kind of, it's not really in balance. It's beautiful around the edges of the city, but the city centre is still very grey, and the wards around Nechells and Shard End and Newtown are really quite hot. The temperatures there are predicted to be very warm. And even now, even without getting to that end point of climate change, as I drive out of the city, if I'm in my car, I can actually see my thermometer dropping as I get to Sutton Coldfield. I drive past the park and the temperature goes right down, and it's quite apparent.
Gosh. Okay, so we're going to move across to healthcare. Have you found resistance from the NHS Trust to pay for improving gardens and green spaces in existing properties?
Yes, I would say that's a question from Amy. Yes, Amy, I would say that the Trust aren't generally interested in improving their existing properties. It is a problem. They're so cash strapped. But what we have done in the past, we have worked, the sort of retrofitting we've done has usually been with somebody like Macmillan, where they've been building a new cancer care centre, or there might be a new palliative care centre, and we all work with them to do something on an existing estate. But where we find we make a big impact is where there's a new hospital build, and the expectations of the trust then are usually very high. They're very well informed, they know what they want, and so we can deliver something really quite sort of game-changing for them.
Amy's asked a second question related to it. Why aren't there more green spaces in the very centre of Birmingham? Cannon Hill Park is quite distant. There only seems to be around the cathedral and behind the library, which you did partially answer before. But
yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy to talk a bit more about that, because it's a real bugbear of mine. If you go and buy, I mean, you could be living in you could be affordable living, you could be living in a penthouse suite in the middle of Birmingham, and there is really nowhere to go. Now, I don't know why the city haven't provided more parks in the centre. I think there's obviously issues to do with real estate and the cost of real estate, the demand to build on it and to always make a profit from it. Those sort of the traditional economics haven't made it sort of inaffordable. So I think that we have to, this is what I say, when we have to reassess where we want to go from here and the priorities that we place on these things. Is it more important to build another 30 or 40 story RPS scheme, or do we want to have that space as a beautiful little green oasis for the residents who already live there? I mean, that's what it comes down to. It's down to priorities. And I think it's for us to be making our feelings known, really.
Most definitely, I definitely agree with that. Did the economic crisis of 2008 help Fira prepare for that pandemic in any way? Or is the firm too big to be affected?
Well, we're not a big company, we're quite a small company. And yes, we can be affected quite quickly. But we can also react quite quickly. We're lucky like that because we can change direction. And as it happens, sort of 2006, 2007, we could see that we had an over-reliance on public sector work. And we then spent a lot of time trying to rebalance our portfolio. So we were working in the private sector as well as in the public sector. So I've seen so many times the government can just stop spending at any time, whether it's the highways program or whatever it might be. And suddenly, if you've got all your eggs in one basket, you know, it's gone and you can't do anything about it. So we've always tried to keep a very broad portfolio of work. We try not to have an over-reliance on any one client. So we like it to be balanced between public and private sector. And it really came home to roost when the austerity measures with the Conservative government in 2010 came into force, when they cut the BSF programme, and all we were finished off our schools, and then schools just disappeared for a few years before they came back again. Unfortunately, we had other work to do, but we had to adapt to that, and it was painful, as all these things. So I'm just pleased that we've got a lot of eggs in baskets at the moment. So if something blossoms, we will benefit from that, and if other things shrink, well, we'll just have to cut our cloth to suit.
Brilliant. Could it be that the council does not push green areas due to avoiding the high maintenance?
Yes, it could well be. And of course, during the sort of austerity times, the parks have had so much funding taken, or councils have had so much funding taken away from them. And then, of course, that in turn means that the parks, because they don't have to be maintained, there's no legislation that says there's a park that has to be maintained. So but you take that away, and if you don't have quality spaces that are well maintained, and when I say well maintained, I don't mean, you know, pristine lawns and beautifully clipped hedges, but they have to be well looked after. Otherwise, people won't go there. They are, it just attracts vandalism and antisocial behaviour. So it's important that they are well looked after. And again, it goes back to where do our priorities sit? Do we want good quality green spaces? Are we prepared to spend a bit more? Would you be prepared to spend £20 a year on park tax, say, for example? These are all the things I think we should be talking about.
Most definitely. Someone's asked if you've been involved in the Digbeth Highline project and the larger development of that area.
No, sadly not, but the Digbeth Highline project, that was part of the, it was before the Digbeth Highline project came into being that we started looking at the corridor for the Highline and the connection into Snow Hill along there. But no, it would be an absolutely fantastic project for the city. It would certainly be good. But it's been done before. Let's try and find something else that's unique to Birmingham rather than copying what they've done in New York.
Definitely, but when it's so good, why would you not copy?
Well, yes.
What do you think of guerrilla gardening and reclaiming public space without official permission, sea bombing, etc.?
Oh, I think that's a great idea, and it's been done very successfully in some cities. At the end of the day, if you do something, you've got to take responsibility for it. So you can't do something and make a right mess. But yeah, I think it's really good. And I think we've got to get wildlife into our cities, and pollinators and so on, and every little bit counts. Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Have you any resources to the best type of plants that absorb pollution?
Oh, right. Oh gosh, that's a tricky one. That is actually quite a big subject, and there's a lot of research going on in that at the moment. So it depends on the different types of pollution, but certainly Evergreen trees are very good at absorbing particulates, so these dust and so on, because they have vegetation on all year round. Certain trees are good at absorbing some of the pollution into their leaves, and then they shed it. What they call London planes are very good at absorbing particulates and actually being able to survive in quite highly polluted areas. So there's I can't go into all here, but there is quite a lot of research, and yes, there are plants that are better than others. And hedges are quite good at absorbing pollution from cars. I think the City Council had an experiment down the A38 towards the McDonald's on that junction with the Pershore, was it the Pershore Road? The Middleway, and they had an ivy hedge there to see if they could actually reduce the pollution.
Did that work?
I don't know what the result is. I'll have to ask the guys at the city. I don't know what the outcome of that was, but I think they did. I remember seeing a program on TV about 2 years ago where they put in a whole line of silver birch trees, and they kept them quite small, like a hedge. And I think it was somewhere in Sheffield, and they measured the pollution on either side of this tiny little hedge running along a tiny little pavement on a terrace, and it was significant amount of pollution that they absorbed that stopped it from going into the homes. Quite incredible. Yeah.
Well, moving towards that then, what kind of planting would you suggest to people living in small flats in the city with small balconies?
I would grow anything. And if you want to grow vegetables, that is a good thing to grow. So you can get these really good sort of wall hangers, which are like, you know, the old things you used to put your shoes in on, hang upon a wall. You can get those to grow vegetables and stuff in. So you could hang those up. You can grow perennials, you can grow annuals. Go out and buy some annuals from your local garden centre. It's not too late to put a few marigolds or petunias in. Anything like that will grow. And have a go at growing some veg. It's very worthwhile, and it tastes an awful lot better than what you buy from the supermarket.
I think we need to give that a go.
Yeah.
And we'll take one last question from our audience, and then we have one last question after that to ask you. So how could we get landlords and developers who own buildings across the city to get incentives for planting rooftop gardens?
I think that's a very good question, because when you look down, particularly on Birmingham, it is so grey, and there's an awful lot of flat roofs where there could be city greening. I think it'll be legislation that will encourage that, because I can't see how developers and landlords will go to the expense unless they absolutely have to. So sadly, I think it will have to be something like legislation, unless, of course, they can use it as a marketing tool for whoever's, if it's a business who wants to be really green, or if it's people who want to be able to gain access. They're living in the city and they want to gain access to beautiful roofscape. I mean, it's a fantastic marketing tool. And of course, companies like Argent really understand the principles of providing great public realm and green space for people who rent and buy their buildings. So that mindset works, but otherwise I think it would have to probably be persuasion with legislation.
Well, if you'd like to take that forward, I'm sure we'd all stand behind you on that one.
Thank you.
Looking to the future, do you think that the current pandemic can be a catalyst of change? And what are the positives you can think can come from it?
Well, yeah, I do think it could be a catalyst for change. I think we have to hold on to these feelings and these ambitions that we have now. As I said, I think it can be a very fleeting moment, and we all move on back to normality and forget that we've just been through one of the most horrendous things in history, and every strand of our lives have been affected by it. So I would like to think that yes, something positive will come out of it, but I think we all need to make a noise about it and keep reminding the politicians it's what we want. And I think I think in the long term, I think, well, if we don't do it, to be honest with you, with the whole climate change issue that's coming upon us, we've got to act now anyway. We've got to do something. We can't carry on with the same old ways. So I have to say that I'm optimistic that things will happen. But we've got to keep the momentum going. And I think all of us as construction professionals can actually add an awful lot of weight to that argument. And I'd ask you all to get onto your email and email your MPs and your local councillors and say just how important you think green spaces are in our cities, because I think you can make a difference. We can all make a difference.
Brilliant. Well, we'll certainly make sure that the BAA reflects that. It's something
Brilliant.
that we all need to do.
Yeah.
That was a really interesting presentation. It was really nice to talk to you, Jane.
Great to talk to you too, Alison. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh no, it's definitely. It's always nice to talk to someone from the Northwest as well.
Oh,
so thank you for taking your time out today. We really did appreciate that. I'm going to hand over back to Connor now so you can round us off, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alison. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yes, thank you very much, Jane. That was really insightful, really interesting. We're going to publish today's talk online next week. So if anyone wants to go back and watch it again, it will be on the new BAA website, which will be going live on Monday. The next in our resilience series will be on the 4th of August, where we'll be joined by Nathan Cornish, who's the Group Director at Urban Splash. We hope we can see you there again. Thank you very much, everyone that signed in today and joined us. We hope you've had a really good time. And if anyone has any other questions, please do just email them into the BAA and we'll put them out online next week. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.